Hi everyone, welcome back to Driving Home with the Professor. I'm in a secret basement location of my home. As you can see, the ductwork in the basement is probably up to code, who knows. I'm lucky enough, or unlucky enough, depending on if you know James well, to have James Chiariello on today's Driving at Home. James and I are both black belts under the Balance banner from Ricardo and Phil Miglioris. James does teach some martial arts every once in a while. He's not a professional instructor, but he is a law enforcement officer. James has enforced the law in the suburban Philadelphia area, but also in the more urban areas, as some would say, and some high crime rates. So he has some interesting insights into all that. As you can see, I've been drinking some water, so I have a bottle of water back there. I will, in this case, allow James to introduce himself, and then we can get started.
All right. Well, I mean, you already said it. I'm James Chiariello. We're black belts together. I have about 5 years of experience as a law enforcement officer in the Delaware Valley, and among other things, you know, martial arts are sort of my interest and passion, and that's kind of what I like to do in my free time.
All right, James. Now that that is over, we'd already talked about what we're going to talk about, but this is now we're going to talk about it. Being that you're in law enforcement and you do martial arts, mainly Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu right now, do you still do Muay Thai or?
Not really. It's been a while. I mean, I still will hit the bag every now and again, but and I'll, you know, I guess the basics I'll try to go over on my own with shadow boxing, but not really training anymore like Jiu-Jitsu or Judo.
Okay. All right. So let me ask you, what from your view, your vantage point, as a law enforcement officer, a police officer, you know, someone that's on the street and has been on some pretty rough streets, what advantages do you have being a trained martial artist when it comes to being a police officer? Or do you feel like there's some advantages for you?
Yeah, there's definitely advantages. Initially, I've been training in martial arts for about 15 years, and I initially got into it because my ultimate goal was to possibly be a police officer. So I thought it would help me. I'm by no means a hulking menace, so I wanted to learn something to be able to defend myself. I guess to answer your question further, I think there's a definite benefit just from the awareness aspect. A lot of times in policing they talk about what's known as a presence and what they would call an external calmness and an internal alertness. And I think when you're training in martial arts, you kind of have an understanding of what dangers could come. You know to watch things like how guys are blading their bodies or if they're gripping their hands. Even just little things. Are you watching for cauliflower ear? Are you looking for handedness? These kinds of things. And I think
You said you're looking for handedness? Is that
like
what you said?
either a right-hander or they're a lefty.
Oh, okay.
That's going to kind of dictate how they're going to probably blade their body, where the power shot may come from, and I think
So for some people that might not know, I'm sorry to interrupt, what blading the body means, maybe go into that a little bit further.
like a boxer stance for a layman's term. You might, if you're standing face to face with somebody, you might blade yourself on a 45-degree angle, kind of how a boxer would stand, you know, so that you're protecting one side and you have your jab hand up to protect you, or just things like that.
So were these things that they talked about during the academy or the different academies that you've had to have gone to, or different trainings or continuing education that police officers receive?
To be honest, I don't really recall necessarily those specific things. I do remember, you know, after I had graduated from the police academy, we took a week-long course with known as Street Survival that was hosted by my department SWAT team, and a lot of the guys did train in jiu-jitsu, so they had mentioned a lot of those considerations, you know, and things, the fact that nowadays, just with the UFC and just the relative ease that you can get information, you know, via YouTube or the internet, guys can watch the UFC and pretty much train on their own by just paying attention to how to apply, say, a guillotine choke or a choke. So you need to be more mindful than, say, prior to the days of social media and the internet when stuff wasn't as readily accessible.
Okay. So earlier you made mention that you were not a hulking menace, so that the people watching or listening get kind of context, like how tall are you, what do you weigh?
I'm 5'6". I'm about 153 pounds, give or take.
So you're maybe as big as Elio Gracie, a little smaller, maybe he might have been taller than you.
I'd say I'm a little bit more muscular, but
Okay,
other than that.
right. So training in the martial arts, kind of, it sounds like what we're hoping is, myself as a professional martial arts instructor, is that it, as much as it gives you the awareness, it gives you a greater sense of confidence as well. Now, is that something that you see you've taken into when you're talking to people, when you're either needing to escalate a situation into arrest or de-escalate a situation, so that there isn't really a problem? Have you seen that kind of level of confidence come through your martial arts training?
Well, I was actually going to get to that point before I was rudely interrupted earlier, but can I continue?
The jokes were on episode 4.0.
Okay, but yeah, to answer your question, I definitely think that factors in. Um, you know, I don't know if there's any studies on this, but I have heard, like listening to some podcasts. Um, I I forget which podcast which it was in, but I remember somebody mentioning about martial artists who are police officers generally resort to less deadly force options, or they're less likely to resort to deadly force when guys are trained. Now, I don't know if there's studies on that to actually show that. It would be definitely an interesting thing to do. But I think, and this goes with a lot of things, I think martial artists have healthier egos. And a lot of times, just from videos that I've seen, it seems like a lot of bad interactions with police sometimes have to do with, an ego measuring, quote unquote, can we curse on here?
Oh, of course. This is, yeah. So it sounds like we're gonna see whose dick's bigger.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. It's a dick measuring contest sometimes, and unfortunately, situations get escalated where they don't necessarily need to. That's just my own opinion. I'm not speaking on behalf of any agency, but I think when guys train, just like when you watch, I like to watch nature shows, but when you watch animals, they puff their chest out a lot, or they flex, so to speak, but they really don't want to fight because they don't want to get hurt. And I think guys should take that approach to the street. I mean, if you could talk somebody down without escalating it to the point where force needs to be used, you're going to limit liability for your agency. You're going to limit liability for yourself. And hopefully you don't want to be on the street hurting people. I mean, because if that's your goal in law enforcement, you're probably in the wrong career. So if
you might want to be on the other side of that career.
Yeah, you might want to be the criminal.
Right.
So, I mean, I think that definitely helps. And you realize that it's not worth it. I mean, even like I could go on the mats with you right now and we could have a great time and roll and train. But when I go on the street, I mean, you're changing the whole surface area. Do I really want to wrestle with that guy on broken glass, or with cars over there, or with bystanders who can maybe edit video where I'm pummeling a guy where that might not be even the whole context of the interaction? So there's a lot of considerations you have to think about.
Let me ask you, being that you feel like, and it seems like you've been able to exhibit this level of confidence, but also a calmer demeanor than, say, maybe some other people. Have you ever had any of kind of your coworkers or people that work in the same departments that you've worked in come up to you and say, "Hey, man, I can't believe how calm you were during that," or "I wouldn't have been able to take that," or "Man, you really de-escalated that situation. You did a much better job than I did." Have you ever gotten that kind of feedback from people?
I mean, generally, like I try to play the good cop because I don't want to make the situation. I hate paperwork, so who wants to do it? So if you can avoid it, but no, I haven't really gotten any kind of compliments from that. I don't know if it's just cops don't generally compliment each other or whatever,
Okay.
But I've had to consider that too, because like I said, I'm not big, and a lot of people you do deal with are big. So why would I want to potentially put myself in a situation where I'm going to get into a physical altercation when I can maybe talk somebody down? And I've talked, some pretty big guys down and kept them calm, while other guys have made them upset. And I mean, a lot of times they're usually more inclined to deal with me, or I've had guys whom I've arrested who've said, "Thank you. You treated me with respect, and I appreciate that." I mean, that goes a long way. At the end of the day, criminal, cop, civilian, whatever, you're still a person. And I mean, people have the same general wants and desires. So respect goes a long way, in my opinion. And that's the overall consensus with most law enforcement officers. And that's most common in our teaching too. It's, I think there's a lot of bad stuff out there that says we don't trust anybody or we're trained not to, and that's just not the case.
So it's funny. I had I was part of an odd argument between a couple friends, and one of the friends is an inner city guy, and he's like, man, he's like the inner city guy came out of me, and I was like, what are you talking about? He's like, man, like I felt like I was disrespected, and that got me so mad. And that's such like a hood mentality. What he was saying is, almost getting to the point of violence because you feel like you're being disrespected. Now, do you see that to be the case, being that you've worked in some inner city areas where the respect in certain neighborhoods and or certain kind of districts, I guess, carries a lot further, or being respectful with someone carries a lot further than in another area?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely has. It definitely has merit with what you're saying. I mean, just take for example, you get some guy from, I don't know, Chestnut Hill or out on the main line. I mean, he has a vested interest in himself. He's, let's just say hypothetically, he's a doctor or a lawyer. He's got a house, he has a car, he has kids. He's not going to do something stupid to, he'll sue you before he does anything else, before resorting to violence. But, you look maybe at somebody from a lower socioeconomic status who maybe doesn't have that much, and in terms of the area, maybe his name is the biggest possession that he has. So if you disrespect that, I think that could definitely maybe set somebody off. And I've seen that, where you're not communicating effectively and maybe it's misinterpreted, and it has set people off to the point where they've, yelled or carried on or had a fit, and then a lot of times you have to talk them down and try to find some common ground with them. I mean, that's really, I think, what a good cop can do, is keep somebody calm and keep their head level so that everybody walks away unharmed, easy as pie, and just keep it moving. So,
right, we're hoping that things don't resort to violence for anybody, right?
Well, I mean, nobody wants to get hurt, and I mean, it's just going to create open up a whole other can of worms.
All right, so how, again, would probably be more anecdotal, but how many police officers have you come in contact with throughout your career that you could say, hey, this percentage has trained in the martial arts or is trained in some sort of defensive tactics that has helped them go down a similar path where I'm at to make these realizations?
To be honest, I don't know. I mean, I know the friends that I have generally train, so I do have friends who train or in and are in law enforcement, but I don't think it's as big as it could be, or maybe it should be. And additionally, just the training alone, like where I work, our state guidelines don't really, other than just the mandatory maybe week of defensive tactics handcuffing, that's it. I mean, we'll qualify with our firearms on a yearly basis, but in terms of actually performing arrest techniques or using defensive tactics, it's negligible. So I mean, you're basically on your own, unless you maybe go to like a continuing education training, but you have to make the effort to do that. It's not state mandated.
All right, so any kind of training that a police officer does outside of the academy and outside of the 1 week a year mandatory is on them. That's at their own discretion.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll pay by with their own dime also.
It can be. I mean, for example, like there are training academies at most county municipal academies or state academies will have training available to them that the department may pick up. They might offer ground fighting or defensive tactics, but with the economy itself drying up of funds, it's kind of few and far between to get it, or you have to be the right guy who they like. So I've dipped into my own pocket many times to take seminars or gone out of my way to do free seminars that were offered and did my own research. So I mean, I guess the one benefit is that you can write it off because it's part of your job title.
Okay.
But I mean,
if there's any IRS agents out there, do not peek into James's finances.
True. Thank you.
So that being said, with your experience level, and I'm going to expect I'm going to get the answer that I'm kind of expecting, but do you recommend some sort of, I shouldn't say some sort of martial art training, but do you recommend a good martial art training for all police officers? I'm not saying should you make it mandatory, but let me rephrase it. Should a police officer invest in himself to be able to walk away knowing that he's done everything to be able to defend himself and become a better police officer?
Yes, I think that's definitely a worthy goal, but I just think that there's some guys who probably shouldn't do it because they're just not the right type of person for it. So if you have the right mentality and you're willing to learn and you're willing to advance yourself, I mean, you should know the job. I mean, like I said, I've been doing this for 5 years and I still want to keep learning. I'm not by any means an expert. So, I mean, you should continually want to better yourself in all aspects, studying the law, you know, your shooting qualifications, driving, defensive tactics, all of that stuff. So I think it's definitely, you know, a worthy goal to do, yes. But some people maybe shouldn't do it just, I mean, I'm sure you've seen in the news there's bad officers out there, you know, and, you know, it's questionable maybe what their goal is in the job itself.
Well, right. I mean, and you would hope that the internal structure of a police officer of a police unit would be able to weed that out to a certain
Yeah,
degree of, you know, like you want to weed out the bad, you know, the bad apples or whatnot. So you would recommend an effective martial arts training to a police officer, and I would think for a couple reasons. Number one, to give you, you know, not even so much for the safety of the other guy, for the safety of yourself, being, you know, giving yourself the hand up on being able to go home that night if you do get into an altercation.
definitely. You know, and I guess just to continue with that point, there's a huge difference between defensive tactics and then survival. You know, I think jiu-jitsu is a really great martial art in terms of maybe making an arrest, you know, restraining somebody, but in terms of actual defending yourself and like taking, if you have to go to the point where it's deadly force and maybe you can't get to your systems, you know, you need to have other options too in your belt, so to speak. So I mean,
So for people that don't quite understand what systems are, I realize that these are things you're referring to that you carry on you, but to the layperson, what are you, when you can't get to your systems, what does that mean?
oh, I mean, if you can't get to your firearm, if you can't get to your OC spray, which is oleoresin capsicum, it's pepper spray. You know, your taser, your baton, you know, things of those natures. I mean, if you're not able to get to those or you're defending yourself from them, you need to basically make your body a weapon, and that's the difference between, I think, defensive tactics and deadly force. You know, if I don't want to go beating the crap out of somebody who has a traffic warrant, you know, but if he's resisting, jiu-jitsu may be a great option to restrain them or to put them in a compliance hold to affect the arrest. But if it's something where maybe somebody's going for your weapon or they're actively trying to kill you, and whether it's close quarters, you may have to use your body as a weapon. So there's a difference, in my opinion, and I think jiu-jitsu is a great martial art for arresting somebody, and I think there's other options too that people could build on for surviving.
Okay. Now, you know, a lot of people, and I'm not saying we're getting sidetracked, but you know, we're touching on some interesting points here. You know, a lot of civilians, right? And me being inclusive, but I have a, you know, better understanding, don't quite understand that police, each department, each state, each kind of federally, locally, countywide, has a use of force continuum, right?
Right.
And you could correct me if I'm wrong, but that continuum kind of dictates the amount of, for lack of a better term, violence that an officer can use against a suspect. And it kind of, and that continuum, from my understanding, is it goes up as the perpetrator's violence goes up, and it should go down as the perpetrator's violence goes down. Is that kind of
Yeah, that's
a basic understanding of it?
yeah, that's the general idea. Generally, it's going to be dictated by the state, the attorney general, and then each agency can kind of, through their SOPs, their standard operating procedures, tailor it to be more fitting. So if they want to be even more restrictive or put some more guidelines on it, they can do that. But everything's going to have to, the state laws and obviously federal law are going to take precedent with what you can and can't do.
All right, and I know that, you know, there's some interesting like changes when you go from like a state level to a federal level, where at the federal level they have a wider kind of berth to do things, as opposed to at a state level you have less kind of latitude.
I don't really know, to be honest, because I've never worked in federal law enforcement, but I just know, for example, where I work, whatever the Constitution allows, my attorney general makes it more restrictive. So just in terms of actually enforcing the law, there's a lot more stipulations, and that's obviously for each state to decide. but I can't really comment in terms of what type of ability federal agents have because I just haven't worked in that type of field.
All right. So let's change gears a little bit, but keeping in the same vein. With your experience how many years have you been involved in the martial arts?
I started when I was 15, so about 15, 16 years now.
All right, so 16 years as a martial artist, 5 years in law enforcement in a few different municipalities, cities, whatever.
Mhm.
If one of your law enforcement buddies were to come up to you that doesn't train, that has no experience, he's never done anything, he couldn't even throw a punch. He just looks like he's like one of those guys that in South Philly we'd call a pepper, right? um, he said to you, James, where I live, there are only single unit martial arts schools. I have a Japanese karate school, I have a Taekwondo school, I have a Krav Maga school, I have a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu school, I have a Muay Thai school, and that kind of thing. From your experience, if this guy had to pick one martial art, and it doesn't have to be one of the five I just named, but if he had to pick one martial art to make himself be a better police officer, but also give him a higher ability of getting home that day, what would you recommend to a law enforcement agent?
I'm going to answer this in two parts. From my own experiences, I think jujitsu or some sort of grappling art is really useful for policing, as I've stated prior, because for effecting an arrest and doing it safely. Maybe against, say, like an emotionally disturbed person where you don't want to injure them, or maybe somebody who is just drunk and not thinking clearly. I think it's a good way to control and to effect the arrest. But if it's terms of getting home, I would really recommend somebody check out what's known as Taurus. I just recently took a seminar with them. It's known as Threat-Oriented Rapid Incapacitation System, and I really wouldn't call it a martial art, but it's a system more or less. You'd have to do some research on your own. It's Taurus, TORIS.org, and you can look online through Google. But in terms of actual getting home safe and neutralizing a threat if you have to, that's what I would recommend. But for day-to-day stuff, I think jiu-jitsu is
So
one.
where's our local tourist school is there a local, are these like kind of like a jiu-jitsu school you can just flip open the yellow pages or jump on
No,
Google and say there's one in Philadelphia or New
no,
Jersey?
it's run by a guy named Torrin Hill, and I was put in touch with him through a mutual friend of ours, Josh Amaro, and they basically do workshops. So they go state to state. It's like 2-day workshops. I think having a martial arts background will definitely help you, but it's not a end all be all with that.
So one singular art's not enough. So what I'm gleaning from this is you need to kind of have these add-on packages, right? Saying, okay,
Yeah.
this torrent. Now, all right. I mean, I hadn't planned on this, but this 2-day seminar that you did, what was that? What was that like? What did you learn? What were some of your big takeaways?
I mean, it's definitely worth it in terms of the training. They just have the ability to create they have the ability to create the worst fight of your life while being safe. I would love to get into more of it, but unfortunately I signed a NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, and they're very particular about that. But
Well, all right. So let me ask you this then. That seems kind of odd. Why would they have you sign an NDA?
I can't speak for why they would do it, but it's just, I guess, it's a very revolutionary type of way to train, and I think they offer a really good product, and they want to make sure that they have I would guess, the ability to teach that long term.
I mean, but doesn't this ND, like, I would think that kind of defeats some of the viral aspect of what some people would be able to do, of talking and kind of explaining what you did. So by you signing this NDA, you're not allowed to go into the specifics of the tactics that you learn, but also the way they were taught to you?
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
All right. So let me ask you this: what attracted you to Taurus in the beginning, other than the kind of, or you got the recommendation from our mutual friend, but through your due diligence, what did you see?
I researched it. I mean, I read some testimonials. Obviously, most of the testimonials don't really tell you the whole aspect of what it is, but
It's great. Come do
yeah,
it.
yeah. Well, I mean, most of the people raved about how for example, if you go on YouTube, they have veterans on there saying it was the closest thing to combat that they've ever experienced, while, or some of them even said it was worse than combat. So they have the ability to create that kind of response in your body where you're not thinking clearly. I mean, anybody can do something in a general setting. Oh, the guy's coming at you with a knife. You're going to block this way and do this technique. But I mean, it's very, very different when you put on, when you change gears and you put it into that, fight or flight mode, and they have the ability to create that while still being safe.
Well, I know that like the Krav Maga guys and the spear guys, claim to do something very similar, where it's that response reaction and
Mm-hmm.
that kind of thing. Now, had you looked into other things before kind of landing on Taurus?
Yeah, I've looked into it. I've been getting more interested in just branching out. I mean, I wouldn't say I'm an expert in jiu-jitsu. I still consider myself a student, but I've jumped some significant hurdles, more so than a guy who's been training 2 years. So I kind of want to build upon that, and so I started doing more research. Trying to figure out a little bit more about striking arts and this and that.
All right. So now with the Taurus, you paid for this out of pocket, and you would recommend this to anybody in law enforcement?
Yeah, I mean, if you have the right frame of mind, I don't. I mean, they give a 20-minute video about what type of student they're looking for, but generally, if you have an open mind and you want to build upon your skill set and you want to actually challenge and question the status quo, even if you were to challenge them in their program, that's what the type of student that they want. They don't want just somebody like, for example, like a CrossFitter who's just raving about CrossFit, or this one is raving about that one. Like, they may be great students, but I don't think they're looking for that type of person. They're looking for somebody who wants to keep an open mind and continually evolve and adapt.
Now, is it open to non-law enforcement as
Yeah,
well?
that's the beauty of it. There's it's military. It's open for military, law enforcement, or civilians. And for example, a lot of people carry concealed. So I mean, there's a lot of options to consider as a civilian, or even if you just want to know how to defend yourself properly, and learn that just for your own personal benefit of just walking home from work at night. There's a benefit that anybody could take away from it.
All right. So this is actually a pretty natural segue, because you seem to be thinking outside of the box, right? Not that am as friendly with you as I am with other police officers, but I don't know how expansive some of these guys' thoughts are, and I know that, all right, man, you're studying your defensive tactics, you're going on your own dime and taking these seminars, you do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. But another thing that's kind of interesting to me that you do, and it's something that I've been considering lately, at first I kind of poo-pooed it, I thought it was bullshit, but as I get older, I think it's actually becoming more important, and I should already have a basis in it, but is, your study of human movement outside of jiu-jitsu. When I say human movement, like things like Ginnastica Natural and the Rafe Kelly stuff, and there's a couple guys that I know you've kind of taken classes and seminars with. So you kind of explain to me, because I'm kind of interested as well, as like what led you down this path, and then once you've gotten on this path, kind of who you've dealt with and where you're at right now with it.
Well, I guess just going along with, I mean, I would say it was like about 2009. I was teaching part-time for Tim Hart when he had his school up at Gracie 360, and I sort of got friendly with Jason C. Brown, who's a very well-known guy in the area for teaching kettlebells, and for a while he was running a CrossFit gym, but he gave me a book called Play As If Your Life Depends on It by Frank. I don't know if I'm going to mangle his last name. It's either Ferencic or Ferencic, but it basically talked about movement being primal, practical, and playful. And his argument was that if, for example, like when my dog runs around and plays, he's not doing sets or going for numbers. He's going for quality over quantity. So, the movement should be practical in that it's useful, playful in that it should keep your attention span. Like, obviously, I'm sure your kids aren't going to want to go sit on a treadmill for 3 hours. They're probably going to run and climb and do things like that. And it should be and primal, so it should be ingrained in like your natural type of body movements. Like weird motions like on the adductor machine or abductor just aren't really what we need to do in real life. So I read that book, and then I stumbled upon an article about MoveNat on on Men's Health, and like I think it was the March 2009 issue, and that kind of was, I had always been looking for something like this, and that just kind of clicked for me. So I had taken a seminar with Erwan Lacour, who is the founder of MoveNat up in New York in 2010, and I've taken 2 seminars with Rafe Kelly, who's he teaches a program called Evolve Move Play. He has a background in parkour and gymnastics, and I think it's a really beneficial thing to do. I think it segues well into jiu-jitsu. I know, for example, Josh Vogel, he's a MoveNat certified trainer. He's done the seminar with me before. Alberto Raballo's done it. Brian Bentley's gone. So it seems like more and more people from jiu-jitsu are segueing into this natural kind of movement stuff. Just for my own personal benefit, I think it really helps keeping your joints loose and while still being strong and flexible. And for me, I mean, I work 12-hour shifts. So a lot of days I'm sitting in a car wearing uncomfortable equipment, and having that ability to move and being cognizant of getting out of the car every half an hour or so just to stretch my legs, I think it keeps me limber and it keeps me healthy and avoiding possibility of maybe injuring myself.
So outside of the seminaring, right? I mean, which is, it sounds like you've done a few since 2009. What do you kind of like? How do you practice this, or how do you do it? Like where do you just go in an open field, a playground? Like what's the deal?
I mean, I like to hike a lot, so a lot of times, like I'll go up when I have the time. I'll go up to the some state parks, or I like to go sometimes in Philly to the Wissahickon, and just be it climb on a tree or do some pull-ups or movements off of them. Running, jumping, climbing, sprinting, crawling. So I mean, you can do that in your house. You could crawl on your carpet if you wanted to. I mean, I try to incorporate those types of movements into my warm-ups for jiu-jitsu, specifically like focusing on the hips and the lower back and shoulders. So I mean, does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, because it's one, it's just like anything. If I take a seminar and I don't have the ability to practice these moves, then that the knowledge gained in that seminar is lost. So I was kind of curious about that. So and the last name I remember is Rafe Kelly, but the couple seminars and the books that you've read, are there any kind of fundamental differences between some of the guys that you've kind of learned from, or reading about, or following their texts, of saying, hey, it's kind of like, I guess in a jiu-jitsu sense, you have the Carlson Gracie way, or you have the Hoist Gracie way, or you have the Helson Gracie way. Is it similar, or are these guys all going down a somewhat similar path with movement?
I mean, I think they take different approaches, but I think it's rooted in the same overall goal, and advancing human movement. Now, this is just what I'm gathering. I'm not speaking for any of them, but like, for example, MoveNet really focuses on like very fundamental movements. For example, running, jumping, climbing, crawling, skipping, throwing, stuff that you might have done like as you've evolved from your, hunter-gatherer days. Whereas there's a lot of that stuff in Evolve Move Play from what I gathered, but they also, he's a traceur, so he has a parkour background, so he tries to incorporate other things in there with vaulting or climbing or jumping that are, very specific to what he's trained in. Frank Ferencic with the Exuberant Animal group, he focuses on a lot of games. Like I'm just going to give an example. You might stand on one leg with another guy on one leg, and you might pull a rope and try to off-balance each other. So you're moving, but you're also having fun with it as well, and that kind of goes in with that primal, practical, playful type of thing. So they all kind of take a different approach, and I would imagine you probably have to, because it seems like everybody's got to have their own kind of thing to offer, because it's a very, very kind of esoteric kind of thing and very, very small,
Okay.
So it's not like a big box gym, or you're just going to go and do arm curls or something like that, like where anybody could teach you.
Now, do you feel like you've kind of, it's helped you in what you were hoping that it would help you with, like kind of your martial arts? It already sounds like it's made you more aware of your body, just even when you're in your car and that kind of thing. But from a martial arts standpoint, is there any way you could quantify how it's helped you?
I mean, in terms of martial arts, I just feel a lot more fluid in terms of the way I warm up. I really focus on using a lot of the warm-ups that I've learned, and that sort of helps keep me loose. I'm getting a lot more interested as I get older in joint mobility work, and we've touched on that with Evolve Move Play, and I try to make that a daily practice to warm up my joints and prep them. and focus on, sort of um, movements that are more natural than just stuff that's going to hurt me or not help me. So I do think it's benefited me. I don't know if it's a direct thing where like I see that my arm bars are getting better and my jujitsu's better, but I think it makes you a lot more aware of your body and then knowing how to, not take stupid risks. And you realize that it's a mat, we're friends. Why am I going to do something to get hurt? I think it helps keep me grounded.
Right. So, but interesting enough, like as a jiu-jitsu guy, you probably have or as a martial artist, you have much higher sense of body awareness than a non-martial artist, right? I mean, we could agree on that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, but you've, after, in all these years, you've kind of maybe exhausted your ability to incrementally increase that. So was that part of the kind of the attraction, or not the attraction to it, but the attraction to stay with it, that you saw these gains in your body awareness that you hadn't seen in a long time?
Yeah, that's definitely a valid point. And I just find it fun. I find it enjoyable. For me, I've never been interested in just going to the gym and doing like, oh, I got to get in here, legs days, arm days, back days. Like I just go and I play and I try to make a workout out of it. Like I said before, my dog doesn't go and run sets or whatever. He just plays and he still keeps in really good shape, whether it's chasing his toy or whatever. So I try to keep that in mind when I do that, and I think that helps to keep me a generalist. And I guess the overall thing is that you want to be a generalist in terms of movement, have a general physical capability rather than a specific, because specifics, you lead you to overuse injuries. I'd be much more content if I could run a decent mile, do some pull-ups, jump if I had to, and stay limber as I get older, and being able to throw a football through a small circle or hit a basketball through a hoop or something like that.
Right, but I mean, like the kind of the conflict comes is that you do a sport, and we'll just say Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, that's very specific oriented, right? I mean, it's arm locks, it's takedowns, it's like certain specific movement patterns that become more successful as opposed to others. So I mean, I completely get in a grand holistic sense,
Right.
right, being a generalist, but you still can't throw away the specificity of your sport, right?
No, absolutely not. I mean, and even in a lot of these natural movement things, they talk about grappling. So that's sort of an aspect of this primitive type of movement, wrestling. I mean, this is an ancient art. Everybody's been doing it. Animals do it. People do it. Kids do it as little babies. So yes, I've gotten more specific in the grappling portion, but that's still considered part of that general ability to move, grappling, striking, all those things. So my logic was that obviously I do something very specific, jiu-jitsu. I don't really want to train as specific. I don't like. I think you get better doing jiu-jitsu by doing jiu-jitsu. I'm not a competitive fighter or tournament player, MMA guy. So for me to lift weight specific for jiu-jitsu is just impractical for me. So I'd rather, in my free time, when I have the ability, do something outside of my sport. So this is why I'm interested in this as well. It keeps me interested.
Well, and that's you make an interesting point, since your goal is to just be a better martial artist, right? As for lack of a better term, do you think that someone that is very specific, that say has the goal of being an MMA champion or the goal of being a jiu-jitsu champion, are these natural movement ideas? Is that something they can benefit from as well?
I think so. I mean, there's tons of YouTube videos out there where they show them training with guys like Ido Portal or taking some of these classes. I mean, even just for example, like GSP was doing gymnastics for a little while up in Canada, wasn't he? And I mean, he was trying to.
Yeah, I know that the Russian system, like the sports system, a lot of their top level wrestlers come through gymnastics as well,
Right.
like they, like that kind of thing. So.
So yeah, I mean, to answer your question, yes, I think there's a benefit to it.
All right. So changing gears, changing from the student, which you kind of been, the martial arts student, the human movement student. You touched on it earlier about teaching at Tim Hart's. I know every once in a while you teach at some of the local academies that your friends have, where you're filling in, and you have a real job. So it's not like jiu-jitsu is your job. But what do you enjoy about when you're teaching people the martial arts, specifically either jiu-jitsu or striking, and that kind of thing? Like what benefit do you get out of teaching?
Um, one of the benefits I get out is I don't really try to get I don't really do a lot of fancy sport jiu-jitsu. I try to keep it somewhat practical just for coming from my perspective. I think I can bring a different perspective than some other people bring. Having a law enforcement background, I don't really I want to focus more on the defensive stuff, so I try to go over that. So for me, it's nice to have guys who I'm teaching who've been kind of focusing more on the sport aspects, maybe show them a little bit more advanced way of doing something, an advanced way of doing a fundamental technique. So, I taught last night and I showed, a basic technique, but there was a little bit more intricacies to it, and seeing them enjoy that really makes me happy and proud of my ability to do that. And it's nice to see people. Obviously, I'm sure you can say as well. I enjoy helping somebody learn a technique and do it well, and then retain that. So for me, that's the benefit.
Yeah, no, and I agree with you. Like one of and it's almost like a selfish benefit that you do feel really good when you see your students either starting to apply or getting it or losing weight or just being kind of like my favorite moments are like when the when the room goes quiet and they're like, oh man, I never thought of that. Yeah, and you're just like, oh man, this is something Phil taught me, or James taught me,
Yeah,
or Rick taught me, or something like that. Those are always when they have that aha moment over something that you didn't even realize was an aha moment for somebody.
yeah. I mean, I definitely can. I definitely agree with you on that because, like, for example, just as a student, I can remember like, oh, Dan Haney showed me this move on this date, and I learned that specifically, and I still use half of these things in my arsenal, but I remember like that aha moment and who taught me that, and that's always stayed with me. And I always try to give credit to where I learned it because you just keep building off of it, which is great.
Now, for you as somebody that kind of teaches part time, and realistically, you teach number one for the love of the art, but number two because you want to be helpful to your friends.
Right.
What are some of the tougher things about teaching jiu-jitsu for you or martial arts for you as someone that's not a professional instructor, but someone that does love to teach and does love to help people?
I mean, I guess difficult things. Just it's sometimes hard, I guess, because, like I said, I don't really try to learn any of these new fancy techniques. That's just my own personal preference, and I just I don't have the time to spend and learn every new guard pass or whatever.
Yeah,
So
if you're playing in the woods, how are you going to learn the berimbolo?
exactly, and I mean, for me, it's just not practical to have mastery of that for what I do. So like, I'd rather know how to get up out of the guard. So sometimes I think it's people aren't necessarily interested in it, and that's trying to make the topic matter relevant or um, making somebody receptive to it. Because a lot of times I do warm up with like an old school self defense, and then kind of just keep it very practical and simple. So I mean, it can be tough sometimes. Maybe some of the purple belts or the brown belts keeping the senior guys interested. And additionally, I don't really have an impressive tournament record. I mean, I've competed. I've gotten some medals, and not anything really prestigious, but I'm not really a name brand. So I mean, a lot of times too, name recognition is a big deal in who you go for an instructor as well. So I mean, I'm just a regular guy, so I try to keep it that way.
No, I got you, but I mean, most of the schools in this area are run by very successful, just regular guys. So that's not, and they've produced some pretty good
Yeah,
students.
right.
But
It's just they have a name base, and that they have that base and everything, so they have name recognition at this point.
so going back to what you were saying is sometimes you get that. It sounds like you get the feeling that some of the senior students are looking for the flashier stuff that might help them win the Pan Ams, but it's not something that fits into your idea of what solid jiu-jitsu is.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's not that it fits into what solid jujitsu is. It's just for me, it's not the type of jujitsu I want to do. Like I want to make it quick and effective, and I'm not going to be doing all these crazy worm guards and stuff like that. It would be better for me to master basic self defense and basic pinning and stuff like that, and getting somebody to turn over to their stomach maybe for a cuffing technique. So yeah, that's
So why do you think that is with some of the higher ranked guys that that they're not as interested in that stuff? But and let's take out that they're not in law enforcement because that's an obvious reason why you're interested. But why do you think that some of the higher the higher belted students don't want to kind of re-tighten down their basics or look at basics from from a more advanced angle?
Um, I mean, I think there's a couple reasons why. I think it's not as exciting. So, I mean, some guys, they want to do the flashy stuff. They want to get right to rolling. A lot of guys compete nowadays, so you're probably not going to use all these techniques every time to win. You have to know some of these, how to deal with, berimbolos and how to deal with these escapes. It's constantly evolving. So I think, the sport aspect of jiu-jitsu, if you're competing, if you have a decent basics, I mean, you want to start mastering some more advanced stuff. Additionally, um, a lot of guys don't like learning old stuff because they believe that they know it. But I mean, as time and time again shows, a lot of people have a hard time just getting up from a side mount.
I see it when I just tell people to stand up and base. I
Right.
want to go around and smack people with a stick when
Right.
and it's realistically it's my fault because I'm not enforcing the rule of making them stand up and base every time.
Right.
But it's kind of the thing. I was like, well, if you don't stand up and base, it's going to hurt you, not me. But then I'm letting myself get frustrated. But I
Yeah. I
think
mean, that's definitely. I mean, you see a guy wearing a brown belt and he doesn't know how to do a basic self-defense technique. And you're like, what were you doing this whole time? It's crazy to me.
speaking of that, did you happen to see the video of Budo Jake and Hickson Gracie?
Yes. Yeah.
That seemed like that was happening there. When
Yeah.
you're watching the video, and I guess it's easy, now that it's already passed. Say, oh, I would have known to do that, but it kind of seemed like, hey, man, that's just really basic self-defense that he's asking you to show.
Yeah, I mean, and that could be with the lineage and stuff. I mean, or he might have just been really nervous around him and messed up. I mean, you're with a living legend, for God's sakes. I mean, so I would think you would try to do it as best as you could, but I don't know. I mean, I don't
You
want to talk.
you seem to be doing fine dealing with this living legend, so I don't.
It's true. It's true. I'm sweating though. You should see my, underneath my shirt.
Nice.
But
All right,
um,
James, we've gone for quite a bit. This is probably one of the more interesting conversations I've had. A couple of them I've had to end early just because the guys were boring, but this is definitely not one of them.
thank you.
Um, I wanted to thank you for being on. Is there anything you'd like to add to what we said? I don't know if you have any sponsors, people you'd like to thank, things that you'd like to promote. You're probably getting paid by tourists, but that's all right. We don't care.
No, no. I just want to thank Marco Perazzo for gracing me with his presence. It's a blessing. And thanks for talking to me, buddy.
All right, man. Yo, thanks for being on.
All right, man. Thanks. Take care.